if I knew he was going to start from day one, and if I knew he was going to play at least 11 games, I would make a bet on him, especially at 150 to 1.
If you're not a quarterback, I just think there's so many things working against you.
And in his first start, he wins Pop-Tart Bowl MVP. So I think there's a lot of upside on a guy like this. I may be a year early.
The Big Bets on Campus podcast. All right,
here we go.
Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and it's officially college football week 0. When you wake up on Thursday, we're going to have not one but two preview episodes. Mike Iannello and myself have broken down the G5 teams in week 0. And for the full college football betting preview, Colin and Stuck walking through all 4 games there in week 0 to get you ready. But today, we have our annual Heisman Trophy Longshots episode. We're looking to ID a bunch of Heisman flyers to be able to add to your portfolio here in August to get you ready for the futures market beyond just conference winners, win totals, and the College Football National Championship. Joining me today are BBOC teammates Colin Wilson and Brett McMurphy, 2 of the best in the business and also 2 Heisman Trophy voters as well. I'll start with you, Brett. How do you feel about the Heisman Trophy all the way here in August, or is it something you only really care about when you get to your ballot later in the season?
I think it's illegal to literally burn money, so I won't show myself lighting money on fire, but that basically sums it up.
Colin, I feel like you're going to
take your significant other out to eat, or go do something. Go put that money on Colorado winning the national title. You have the same result.
Colin, I have a feeling you feel a bit differently on this. Not only can you bet on a player to win the Heisman Trophy, there's also new markets this year where you can have those parlays between a player winning the national title and winning the Heisman in the same season. So a bit more value on the board if you go in that direction. How do you feel about the Heisman here in August?
Well, a Heisman Trophy winner that's going to win the national title, we don't get Joe Burrow in the game every year. So that's an interesting parlay. But for me, this is a market that I don't really use because I fall in love with players. It's a market that I use to offset the numbers that are already currently on teams. I have 3 long shot Heisman picks today, and really it's a reflection of the team that I love. Because if we've learned anything, there's a lot of rules about how to bet this. You need to be a playoff contender. You need to have counting stats out the wazoo. So I think today we're bringing some long shots. I saw your list. We're going to bring some long shots that are going to get those counting stats, and they're going to have a real place in our college football scene come November when we get those playoff rankings fresh on election night. That was, by the way, Brett, that was the response when I listed the schedule of the college football playoff release. Somebody said the earth will not exist when the college football playoff rankings come out on election night at the same time. Like, the internet will blow up. So I look forward to it.
Now, before we kick things off, a little bit of a teaser here. We're going to close today's episode with a special treat. Our audio director, Matt Mitchell, is forcing Brett to share a story that neither Colin nor myself have heard. So just like the audience, this will be the first time walking through this. That'll be at the end of the episode. But let's get started first, Colin, with your long shot that you're building your portfolio around, at least from a value perspective, to get things started.
Right. From a value perspective, this team is 20 to 1 to win their conference. They're 4 to 1 to make the playoff. I don't like either of those numbers. And it's a real high variance team. We could actually see this team go from their win total of about 6.5 up to 9, maybe 10. And that's going to be USC. I'm going to start with quarterback Miller Moss. He's listed at 40 to 1. Those are better numbers than anything you have. If you go and read practice reports right now, Miller Moss is going to be the starter. It is his job. Jade Maeve is there. He came over from UNLV. But quarterback coach, I got his name here in front of me. Hold on a second. Yeah, quarterback coach Luke Heward was quoted just a couple days ago saying, this is Miller Moss's job because what he has improved from last year to this year is his ability to take care of the ball. Are we falling in love with this pick because he had 372 yards and 6 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl? I think it really just put him on the map. But remember, for me, this is a team award also, like how good your team is. And I know that this is a Heisman podcast, but if the USC defense can jump up to, say, 70s or 60s or rank 50s with their new additions on defense, especially from a coaching perspective, then they're absolutely going to eclipse their win total. They're going to surprise in the Big Ten. And I go back to the bowl game in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville. That defense for USC missed 141 tackles last year. In the bowl game against Louisville, they missed 6. And that's the effect of D'Anton Lynn being on the field, although he wasn't officially a coach. He was on the field for practices. And then you look around Miller Moss. If their team is going to succeed defensively and be better, that's going to give him more opportunities and garbage time to sweep up teams on the schedule. And so when you look at his weapons, it's like, how could you go wrong with Joquavius Marks from Mississippi State? He was the bell cow there, pun intended. Zachariah Branch was our Action Network first-team All-American, maybe the most explosive weapon in the nation, 2.1 yards per route run from the slot. And then tight end Deuce Robinson, he had 3 yards per route run as a tight end, and he was the number 1 tight end in the country from a recruiting class perspective. There's tons of weapons around Miller Moss. This is a USC team that I think has a very high ceiling, higher than what their win total is. I like Miller Moss 40-1 to offset the USC market.
Brett, let me bring you in to kind of vet this pick a bit. How do you think about players who don't have a whole lot of track record to be able to compete with? Sometimes that's a good thing, where you look at a player like Andrew Luck. He had accomplished so much during his career. It was a question of, can he eclipse those numbers in his final season on the farm? And that kind of hurt him a little bit, where you have Miller Moss, who had a very productive bowl game, but outside of that, he's not competing with season-long stats. Do you think that actually helps him or hurts him coming into this year with limited experience?
No, I do, Mike. And I think, and I actually, I know I said earlier I wouldn't play any Heisman preseason plays, but actually, if I did, I really like that Miller Moss pick, because one thing Colin didn't mention, Lincoln Riley has coached a number of Heisman winners and finalists, so he has the offense to put up the numbers that voters seem to like. I agree with you, Mike, because I think it's better. You don't want to be the favorite going into the season, because all anyone's going to do is nitpick your game. They're not going to talk about your 4 touchdowns. They're going to talk about your 1 interception. They're going to find reasons to poke holes in your game. Where if you kind of come out of nowhere, where you're kind of unassuming and you come, almost like a horse race, you come around the last rail, the last turn, in 4th or 5th, and then you catch the field. I think that's the best way to do it. Now, obviously, it's impossible to predict who those guys will be. So, yeah, I have no issues with taking somebody that nobody's talking about right now. In fact, I would prefer to take somebody that nobody's talking about right now, because I just think all anyone wants to do is find the negatives in people's games when they are projected to be the winner, and then you kind of shuffle up almost like a horse race, NASCAR race, whatever, when we get towards the end of the season.
All right, I'll throw my first pick in the ring here. Avery Johnson, Kansas State, 28-1. And I wrote this up in the New York Post a month ago when he was in the 35 to 40-1 range. I still think there's value, and it's pretty simple. There's a good chance with the new college football playoff rules that the ACC or Big 12 champion could actually fall in that 6 to 12 range. But because they'll be a top 4 conference champion, they automatically get elevated into that first round bye conversation. And I think human nature at play here, you want a player that is in the playoff, and when you see them getting a bye, I think the human nature is that team's a little bit better than they actually are. And when you look at Heisman history, 7 of the last 10, all in the college football playoff era, came from playoff teams. The exceptions were Lamar Jackson, Williams from USC, and Jaden Daniels last year. All 3 of them put up insane video game numbers. So it always benefited the candidate to at least be in the mix down the stretch, and in most cases needing to be in the playoff field to get that boost. Also, K-State, I think they, as a program that's certainly not sexy, they're not a public team, they still have been able to send players to New York. You look at the last 25 years, Michael Bishop finished second to Ricky Williams in the Heisman race in 1998. You had Darren Sproles as a 5th place finisher, and Colin Klein in 2012 finishing 3rd behind Johnny Football and Teo. I think there's a good chance for K-State to surprise some people here. And Avery Johnson has the athleticism and the potential for big plays and big stats to play his way into this conversation. Because you look at him, he's a phenomenal athlete. He's a 3-star, a 3-sport star out of high school in Wichita. And Wichita is the key here, because otherwise I don't think Kansas State would have ever got this kid. Their recruiting coordinator was also from Wichita. He was on him as early as 8th grade. So they're able to get a rare blue chip in the Sunflower State, keep him home. And, the fact of the matter is he was able to run off an established starting quarterback who goes to Ohio State. I think that speaks to his confidence and the coaching staff's confidence. In limited work last year, he had 5 rushing touchdowns in a single game against Texas Tech. That screams Heisman numbers to me. And in his first start, he wins Pop-Tart Bowl MVP. So I think there's a lot of upside on a guy like this. I may be a year early, and I will absolutely acknowledge that. But I think at 28-1, 30-1, there's still value in grabbing a guy like this because he has an opportunity to do it both with his legs and his arm. And I know that Colin likes to talk about size and potentially quarterbacks getting beat up, and it's something important to keep in mind. When he came in last year as a freshman, he weighed 175 pounds. You go ahead and refresh that roster page at K-State, he's up to 192. Can he take a full season worth of pounding between, all of the hits he's going to take outside the pocket and an offensive line that's breaking in 3 new starters? That's the question for me. If he stays healthy, I think he is K-State's version of Pat White. I think he's going to do a lot of great things with his legs. Colin, what do you think about that pick?
No, I completely agree. And you've already called out like what I think is the reason that I've laid off of Avery Johnson is he had that coming out game, and then his numbers and mop-up play or duty that he had after that, they really kind of declined. And I don't know if the playbook got out on him or if he just wasn't being utilized the way he was when he burst out onto the scene. That is one of the questions. His size is a question to me with missing offensive linemen. I would want that there. And then Chris Kleiman's scheme, just double running back sets all the time. And so ground focus makes me worry about Avery Johnson's passing yards. I've seen this before where it's like the passing yards are 1,000 off the leader on the board, like whoever's throwing for Tennessee, and then Heisman voters are like, well, he doesn't have the passing. So I worry about the scheme for Kleiman to ever produce a Heisman voter, but the kid, absolutely, Avery Johnson has the skills to win it and be there in New York. It's just a matter, is this scheme going to let him, and is this offensive line going to protect him?
Now, when I looked at both my picks and yours, Colin, neither of us were interested in Travis Hunter at 60-1. And I'll bring Brett into the conversation here. Not only your own ballot, but when you talk to other voters, non-quarterbacks, particularly players on the perimeter skill position, and a rare player playing both ways. Obviously, Charles Woodson was able to get it done in 1997. At 60-1, it's a pass for us. So much has to go right for Colorado on the field. I think at the minimum, they need to win 9 games for him to be a finalist. But where do you come down on Hunter potentially being able to put together multiple Heisman moments to stay in the race for the entire season?
Yeah, real quick, Mike. One thing you didn't mention about Avery Johnson, I talked to Chris Kleiman in Las Vegas at Big 12 Media Days. Everyone cast your ticket. There's a Media Day reference. And he brought up new co-offensive coordinator Matt Wells. And he said he's very excited what Matt's going to bring to the passing game for Kansas State. So I think that probably brings you even more value maybe that you weren't aware of with Avery. For as far as Travis, I mean, look, you guys know all the stats. If you're not a quarterback, I just think there's so many things working against you. And as great as Travis is both ways, ultimately, the team's not good enough. So that's one negative against him. But I just don't think, unless you're returning punts, kickoffs, you're playing offense, defense, you literally never leave the field, which pretty much he does. I guess he could make a case, but, he had the breakout game last year in game 1, and we added him to our infamous list of September Heisman winners with Denard Robinson, Geno Smith, Kenny Hill, and Leonard Fournette, all guys that I don't even think any of them made New York City. So, again, is as impressive as he is, I don't think he has any real shot to get to New York City.
All right, who do you think has a shot to make it to New York City, Colin, for your next pick?
Oh boy, my next pick I absolutely love. I'm glad he's in transition, moving from your podcast to my podcast. Again, this is a team award for me because I know it's focused around the player, but the team has to do well. And the dark horse in the ACC that everybody's liking to bet is NC State, and Grayson McCall is 110-1 out there to win the Heisman. I really shouldn't have to throw stats out there. We've been betting on this since he was at Coastal Carolina in 2019. Probably one of the best decision makers I've ever seen in passing downfield as far as running a triple option RPO in space that they did with Jamie Chadwell all those years. He's completely ready to take over Robert Anae's offense, which poor Robert Anae has had to live like a decade with Brennan Armstrong as his quarterback, who's just leaky with the ball and passing and rushing. Now he gets Grayson McCall, who has 78 career passing touchdowns, only 12 interceptions, 9,000 passing yards, and a very cool low 2.4% turnover-worthy play rate. You're throwing another 1,100 yards on the ground and 15 touchdowns on the ground. He can absolutely run this offense. He was tailor-made for this offense. And it helps to have a wide receiver on the Heisman board as your target. Kevin Concepcion is here. He had an electric 2.3 yards per route run. That is going to be the go-to guy. He had 10 touchdowns last year for the Wolfpack. I'm sure he's going to be Grayson McCall's number one guy. And so, when you give me a defense like Tony Gibson's 3-3-5 on the other side that is going to get a couple extra possessions over the year, and I know that Grayson McCall can run a clean game for this offense, what's the limit here? If NC State can win the ACC and they can get to 10 wins, which they have a schedule that says they're going to do really well this year, Grayson McCall's in the mix. So I'll take 110-1 on arguably my favorite and maybe the best ever G5 quarterback.
When you look at NC State quarterbacks making a run at the Heisman, they misuse Russell Wilson to such an extent that he ends up transferring to Wisconsin and is finally used to, the full extent of his powers. You have to go back to Phillip Rivers in the early 2000s for a guy who put up huge video game stats, and essentially he ran into the buzzsaw of them not being able to win enough games. Clearly, all of these picks, you want them to be in the college football playoff mix, hopefully getting to a conference championship game to get that extra data point there at the end. What do you think about a player coming from a non-traditional blue blood, Brett, to be able to win the Heisman?
Colin, you forget about Ty Detmer. He may be the greatest Group 5 quarterback ever. Look, we won't go into it. We've discussed this before. The gap between the power leagues and the non-power leagues continues to grow and grow. It dwarfs the Grand Canyon. And unfortunately, I think that falls into play with the Heisman. There's not going to be a non-power league player win the Heisman Trophy. Maybe they'll create a new trophy for the non-power leagues. But yeah, it's unfortunate. Look, I don't like all this stuff. People think, oh, you like that these bad things are happening to the non-power league. I don't. I hate it. I hate it for college football, but that's the reality of it. And so, yeah, I would not consider anybody that's not at a power league.
For my second pick, I'm going with Kyron Drones from Virginia Tech at 100-1. And it's simple. Right off the bat, we've been beating the same drum. Virginia Tech can win the ACC. And by winning the ACC, they can make it into the college football playoff. And they have all the pieces around Drones. Some of these cases are a really talented quarterback, but there's questions on the line. There's questions at the skill positions. Virginia Tech is loaded everywhere. They have one of the most experienced teams in America. They closed really strong last year, including a huge bowl game performance. Drones has 4 starters back on the offensive line, a great running game to take pressure off of him at times. And the receiving core, I had to go way back to look at all the Virginia Tech receiving cores. This may be their best of all time. Allie Jennings was an absolute dog at Old Dominion. He was banged up last year. If he's healthy, he's a big playmaker. Daquan Felton made Bruce Feldman's freak list. He's 6'5", 220 pounds. He hit 22.4 miles per hour as his top speed last year in game. Broad jumped 10.8, ran a 4.42 40-yard dash with a 36.5 vertical. They have the dudes on the perimeter to make life easy for Drones. And you saw how comfortable he got down the stretch. He finishes with 17 touchdowns against just 3 picks, but he also had 642 yards on the ground. So can he flirt with a 30-plus touchdown season? Because I think that's absolutely the minimum, threshold to be able to be a Heisman-winning quarterback. Now, the schedule, in my opinion, are what Heisman dreams are made of, because you get a lot of stat padding early. Vandy, Marshall, Old Dominion out of the gate, and then 2 more key games throughout the season at Miami on September 27th, and they host Clemson on November 9th. Enter Sandman. Lane Stadium's going to be insane. If they win that, that's the kind of platform that you need to come from the outside and to win as a triple-digit Heisman long shot. So I want to throw this to Colin first. What do you think about Drones? I know that he leaves something to be desired as a passer, but if he can improve a little bit, a lot of these guys are going to make his life a lot easier.
And he's definitely got the schedule to get that started with the list of secondaries that they're going to start off with. And it is one of the softest. I mentioned NC State's schedule was nice. This one, Virginia Tech has the most conducive schedule. Maybe with SMU. I got to think about that because there is some really soft schedules in the ACC. But he gets the schedule. If the passing yards come and some of the non-conference play, some of the easy cupcakes in the season, then truly he is playing for the Heisman, or at least a spot at the table in New York against Miami, who's got their own Heisman contender, and against Clemson, which I don't know if Kate Klubnik's ever going to figure it out. But that defense is definitely Heisman worthy if you're able to beat them in Lane Stadium. So I would say, for me, if you're going to win the Heisman, you're going to have to beat Miami, and that's probably your hedge ticket. I would take a Kyron Drones Heisman bet, and then I would turn around and probably bet Miami on the money line to even that out.
In previous ballots, Brett, have you ever had a Virginia Tech Hokie on your ballot?
Actually, Mike, you're not aware of this. My preseason bowl projections will be out Monday, So they may be out by the time you hear this. They may come out after you hear this. I have Virginia Tech making the playoffs. So if that happens, that would bode well for your Heisman ticket.
I like the sound of that. That's pretty strong. Let me throw one question kind of broader to our group here. Arch Manning is out in the market between 100 to 150 to 1. I went through the Heisman winners. None of them started as an entrenched backup. So clearly the books are, not providing value to the market, to the bettor. What is with this number? I understand that it's a Manning. A Manning hasn't won a Heisman since, I believe ever at this point. So I don't exactly understand why there's all this love for somebody who is clearly going to start as number 2. But I'll twist the question in this way. Is there anything that could happen during the season, whether Ewers struggles and he comes in, Ewers gets hurt, that all of a sudden you would take him seriously because he has all the pieces around him? I'll throw this to you first, Colin. What are your thoughts on Manning in general?
If I knew he was going to start from day one, and if I knew he was going to play at least 11 games, I would make a bet on him, especially at 150 to 1. But his odds would probably be about 40 to 1, 30 to 1 if we knew all of that. And so you wonder, what is this number? He isn't a starter. He's got limited exposure, and it's just the last name there. But really what it is, it's a reflection of the money that's come into the market. A lot of the books send me their spreadsheets about who's getting tickets, who's getting handle, where are we exposed. Arch Manning's top 3 up there. And that's why that number has crashed down to 150 to 1. And people are just blindly putting money on it. But it's the same reason when we see Colorado taking all this money to win the national title and eclipse their win total. It's just one of those things where people are infatuated with the story. They're infatuated with the brand. And Arch Manning, enough said. You don't need to know anything else more about the kid other than his last name. And I think there is some legs to him playing this year. There's a lot of people at SEC Media Days kind of off to the side saying, we don't really know if Quinn is the guy. And I did a little deep dive on it, and I know I put it in our SEC preview, that Quinn really struggles with timing routes. When he has curls, when he has hook, when he has things that he has to hit it on a dime, his success rate and his EPA are extremely low, below replacement level throwing. When he hits go routes, things like that, slants, he's astronomical in success rate. It goes up from a percentage perspective. So is there a chance that Arch Manning has a higher ceiling than Quinn Ewers? Absolutely. How long is Steve Sarkisian going to sit around until he makes that change, if a change is needed? So it's interesting. I think you need 2 quarterbacks to win the national title. I think you need to at least have some relief somewhere in case of injury. So I would say Arch Manning's ever out of it, but you need injury, you need inefficiency, you need Texas to probably drop a game for them to make a change. You need a lot to happen to get Arch Manning home.
Any thoughts on this, Brett?
Yeah, you're basically betting that Quinn Ewers gets hurt and is out for the year, and it would check the box of a great storyline. Backup coming in leads Texas back to the college football playoff. But there's just so many things that would have to happen. I can't even speak because I don't know how to describe it. If you want to do it, go ahead. But it's literally like you're betting on, is Quinn Ewers going to suffer a season-ending injury? And if so, then you get 150 to 1 that Manning could get to New York City. I think it's a long shot, obviously.
All right, let's go way out on a limb, Colin, and pick 2 more players that are actually set to start this season. So at least you have a chance right out of the gate. Who's your third pick?
Let's start with the team I love. I have placed plenty of money on this team to make their conference championship game. I'm going to go to Ames. I'm going to go to Iowa State, and I'm going to say Rocco Becht, who is on the board at 250 to 1. We're talking about Arch Manning, 150 to 1, not guaranteed to even play this year. Rocco Becht was a revelation to Matt Campbell. I spoke to Matt Campbell at the same media day that Brett and I were at, and where did Rocco Becht come from? Just eyeballs, where did this come from? I think the only thing Matt Campbell could say is his high school tape looked a lot like Brock Purdy's. But the level of explosiveness of this offense was insane, because what Iowa State is they are a 2-3 tight end set. They're just trying to move the chains. They've always been high in success rate on offense, but they've never had explosiveness anywhere. This is a team that finished 11th in pass EPA last year. Rocco's final numbers were 20 TDs to 8 interceptions. I mentioned turnover-worthy play rate before. I like that on quarterbacks where you don't make a lot of mistakes. He was at 2.7%. That is low. His adjusted completion percentage, and this is why I love Rocco Becht. When he's in a pressured pocket, his adjusted completion percentage goes from 75% down to 63%. That, for a true freshman, is impressive. Usually you don't see that bump for 2 or 3 years in college football before a quarterback can handle a pressured pocket. Rocco had no problems with it whatsoever. So when you look at his weapons, all the weapons you and I have talked about, he's got 2 of them that average 2.6 yards per route run. Absolutely electric in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Both of them combined for 150 targets last year. We talked about Avery Johnson missing some offensive linemen. Iowa State gets all 5 of them back. Then you have a tight end who's an automatic first down every time in 6'7" Benjamin Brahmer. I see Iowa State continuing to be highly successful on offense and moving the chains. But this EPA, this explosiveness that they were able to produce last year with Rocco Becht, who comes in after a gambling scandal, wasn't even expected to play with Hunter Deckers there. It's very impressive. The one thing I hate is that Iowa State has never won 10 games in the history of their program since 1895, right? That's a problem. The Big 12 is huge. It's going to have some tiebreakers to see who gets into the championship game. There's hurdles for Rocco Becht to get over too. But as a long shot, I don't think you could do any. You can't do any better than this at 250-1 with a guy that has major weapons and a guy that's already shown explosiveness at a team that's supposed to contend for their conference.
The ghosts of Troy Davis and Seneca Wallace, hopefully they can urge him on, get a little luck in terms of the win column, because I agree with you. All the pieces are there, and the Big 12 is wide open. From a conference perspective, Brett, do you think there's a major discount grabbing guys outside of the Big 10 and SEC? Because they seem to be priced prohibitively. Everyone's starting to have this conversation. Is there this chasm between the Big 10, the SEC, and everybody else? Whereas some of these leagues can be a lot of fun. And I think at the end of the day, people still gravitate towards fun stories to players with, deep highlight reels that have those kind of big plays.
Mike, I think it's more a testament to how balanced the Big 12 is. There's literally 6 or 7 teams that can win that league. And I don't think anybody from a Big 12 team that does not win the Big 12 championship is going to have a shot to get to New York City. I think it's going to be too difficult. I think the Big 12 champ's going to have 3 losses. The runner-up probably has 3 or 4. I don't think a Big 12 runner-up player can get to New York City. So I think the odds are more because it's uncertain. There's not a clear-cut favorite. So, you like Avery Johnson, Rocco Becht, both, legitimate great players, but I just think the Big 12 is so balanced. Everybody's going to beat each other up, and how will that impact their Heisman hopes?
Off the back of that comment, I'm going to throw one more Big 12 passer in here. I'm going to go Garrett Greene from West Virginia, 200-1 to win the Heisman. And the upside is pretty clear. He was top 20 in QBR last year, 28 total touchdowns as a true dual threat quarterback. He has to improve as a passer, but the good news is that 6 of his top 7 pass catchers are back. They get Jaden Bray in the portal from Oklahoma State, who showed out in the spring. And Greene had his Heisman moments. His running ability is really incredible. He had double-digit rushing touchdowns, so he is a weapon, in the goal-to-go situations. And he is willing to take shots downfield. They finished 31st in line yards from this offensive line. They returned 3 starters there. 4 of them are seniors in total. And let's talk schedule. I always like to see how these things set up. The opener against Penn State at home. Game 1 for the Nittany Lions with a new offensive coordinator, lots to prove on offense. And their defense really has to come together because they are breaking in 3 new corners in their 4-2-5 defense under Tom Allen. Manny Diaz gone. If you want to catch Penn State and shock the world and have a coming out party as a Heisman candidate, I think this is the spot to do it. I've been in that stadium before in Morgantown. It is going to be a zoo. I think there's a chance if he were to upset the Nittany Lions, he goes from 200-1 to 50-1 overnight. I'll pitch this to you first, Colin, in terms of the upset potential for the Nears in week 1. Do you think that's just far outside of any realm of possibility, or do you think that ties in with my logic that 200-1 is just too generous on a quarterback who can score in 2 different ways with the football?
Well, as far as the Penn State-West Virginia game, there's some revenge here for me after losing that bet when Franklin decided to push it in last year. And I'm sure Neil Brown and West Virginia hasn't forgot about that. So there's revenge for them too. And plus, also from a Penn State side, has Drew Aller learned Andy Kotelnicki's offense yet? That is a very complex pre-snap offense, and we'll see if Drew Aller is able to pick that up. I do like Garrett Greene. I love West Virginia. It was the team that I was on before anybody last year. And I love their offensive style. The reason I didn't have him on my radar and the reason I laid off of West Virginia to do damage in the Big 12 was because of their defense. It was so filled with portal on the back end that Jordan Leslie and Neil Brown they continue to work to get that West Virginia defense back to the level that it was in years past. So it's really the defense. That's a double-edged sword, Calabrese. I mean, you want to be in shootouts to build your numbers. You don't want to be in shootouts and have losses on your record. So it's tough, but Garrett Greene is definitely a boss, and I respect it.
Stop what you're doing right now and subscribe to the newest college sports YouTube channel.
College football is around the corner, and the new BBOC channel is your destination for betting on college sports.
Interviews with former college athletes and other topics such as College Football 25.
Subscribe now and get in on the action.
I know you think that Heisman futures are just lighting money on fire. Did we convince you with any of these 6 picks? Do you like any of them from a value perspective to maybe throw some couch change on it?
I laugh when people say value. There's no value in a losing bet. Sorry, you didn't convince me.
All right, it's story time here, Brett. I just want to put this out there for the audience. This is a bit unusual. We're, trying to give you a little treat headed into college football season, but I will clear the way. I'm excited to hear this one, Brett.
If you like it, be sure and tell Matt Mitchell you like this. If you hate it, be sure and tell Matt Mitchell you hate it. This has nothing to do with football. How's that for a tease? I guess I'm about to hijack the rest of this conversation. So June 20th, 1979, neither of you guys were alive, but I was. Were you alive, Colin?
Barely.
Okay. I was alive too. And be free to jump in with any questions. I was alive too that day, but I thought I was going to die. I was on flight 293. I boarded flight 293. So did this guy named Nikolai Kavea. He's from Yugoslavia. I found out later that he had killed more than 17 people in his life. He committed his first murder when he was 14. He threw a wounded German soldier down a well. In November of 78, he was arrested for bombing a Chicago home of a diplomat. Convicted in May of 79 in Chicago, but released on bail to New Jersey, where he was living. A month later, on June 20th, he was on my American Airlines flight from LaGuardia to Chicago. Then I would go from Chicago to Oklahoma City. I had been in Europe with a group of high school seniors from Yukon, Oklahoma, and we were coming back from that trip. He had smuggled a homemade bomb onto the plane, plastic explosives. Midway through our flight, he took over control of the plane and sat in the stewardess jump seat outside the cockpit and held on to these little, looked like tubes of toothpaste in his hands. This flight attendants never told us we were hijacked. Eventually, they said that he had taken control of the plane. We land in Chicago. As soon as we land, you usually go up to the gate or whatever. We just sat on the runway. We did not move. We sat there and sat there and sat there. We sat there for 11 hours. I'm not exaggerating. During that time, I looked out the window I was in the first row of coach. So there was a bulkhead between first class and coach. I was in the first row of coach on the aisle, and I had a little Instamatic camera, and I would literally lean into the aisle and take a real quick snap of the hijacker. I didn't have the flash on. I didn't want him to see me. But out the window to my right, there were, policemen, SWAT, whatever, crawling on their bellies through the field. On the left, I'm not exaggerating, there were 100 police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. During this whole time, as a high school journalist, I'm actually taking notes on a little the paper napkins they give you. I'm writing down notes of what all is going on. Like in my mind, in my 17-year-old mind, I'm thinking, well, if the plane blows up, this little piece of paper is going to survive and it will solve everything. Everyone will know what happened. Side note on me trying to take photos of the hijacker. After we got off the plane, the authorities asked us if any of us had pictures of the hijacker, and myself and another a parent that went with us did. So I gave the police my camera and my film. Well, during the whole process afterwards, I talked to somebody with the Associated Press. They said they would buy my film for $1,000. I said, great. A couple of days later, they call me at home and they say that they are no longer have any interest in my film. And so I was out $1,000. So basically, because I didn't use a flash, I didn't have any good shots of the hijacker. So basically what I'm saying is, yeah, AP, you stiffed me $1,000. Colin, if you can figure out what the compounded interest is for 45 years, please let me know, because I'm contacting my attorney and we will be suing AP. Basically, that's it. He let us off after 11 hours. They pulled stairs up to the plane. We walked off down the flight of stairs. It was weird. During the whole time, I never really thought I was going to die or anything was going to happen, because the flight attendants did a great job keeping everybody calm and stuff. But when they opened the door to get off the plane, since I was first row coach, I was one of the first ones off. And literally when I saw the mass of people and just everything out there, cliche, but it looked like a movie. I mean, I lost it. That's when I started crying and realized what could have happened. We go back to the airport. It's funny, when we get to the airport, obviously they take us into a special room. They have one side. They say, if you want to talk to the media, go to the left. If you want to talk to the media, go to the right. Of course, I got to talk to the media. I go to the left. Again, people that weren't alive. 1979, no cell phones, guys. A bank of telephones. Call whoever you want. I called my parents. Nobody answers the phone. I called all these different friends. Nobody's at home. Finally, I call a good friend of mine. His sister answers. Kathy, is Jim there? No. She goes, what are you doing? And I said, we just got off the plane. She goes, everybody's at the airport. So literally the whole town of Yukon, Surrey Hills, where I grew up, everybody's at the airport. I did a ton of interviews. I was looking through the clips. You think I'm a bad interview now. Back then, somebody quoted me saying, I'm sure I wasn't misquoted, oh gosh, we've seen a few reporters today. Here's some of the papers. You guys are watching on video. Front page. That's my mom right there.
There's your mustache.
There's no mustache in 79.
No mustache?
That wasn't
Let me
me.
see it.
Chicago Tribune. Here we go. My mom had a great line in one of the stories, because we basically, after we got off the plane in Chicago, we sat there, they took care of us. Then we flew to Oklahoma City. So we arrived 15 hours later, whatever. And my mom said, the ironic thing is, Brett has never gotten on time anywhere in his life. And I was late once again. One question I get asked, you guys can ask whatever if there are any questions. Everyone thought because you're hijacked, you get to fly free after that. Literally dozens of people, when they knew I was hijacked, do you get to fly free now? No, I don't get to fly free. Also, after a few months after, American Airlines sent all of us a little silver pendant. I don't have it with me. And it had flight 293 on it and the date on the other side. So as soon as we're done here, I guess I should check with Darren Ravel and see what that's worth on the open market. So that's the story time. If you liked it, be sure and let Matt Mitchell know. If you're bored to death, be sure and let Matt Mitchell know. So yeah, my wife loves that I'm hijacked because she loves to fly with me, because the odds of being on a hijacked plane twice in your life, I'd say, are as long as Colorado winning the national championship.
Oh man, he went there.
Quick question for you, Brett. In terms of the hijacker, clearly he didn't have a DB Cooper-esque, exit plan. Did he end up spending the rest of his time in a federal penitentiary, or did the police take him down that day?
Actually, two things I forgot to mention. So again, this is 1979, before 9/11. Everyone got off the plane. They gave him a plane to fly back from Chicago to New York. When he got to New York at JFK, they gave him another plane because he wanted to fly to Yugoslavia to get an associate of his out of prison. So they actually gave him a plane and flew him back to Yugoslavia. On the way, he decided he wanted to go to Ireland instead. He got to Ireland and he did surrender. He spent 20 years in jail. When he got out of jail, he did some interviews. I've read a lot of those. One of them, he said that he is the one that gave bin Laden the idea of flying planes into buildings. He actually said when he was flying back to Ireland that his idea was to take over that plane and fly into a specific building, but because they didn't have the right proper tracking equipment, he decided not to do that. His attorney convinced him to surrender when he got to Ireland. So he died, I think, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. I think he was in his 70s when he died. But yeah, he claims he gave bin Laden the idea to fly planes into buildings. And that's, quite a footnote, I guess.
I think after working with you for the last few years, I've always had this question in the back of my head. It's like, how does McMurphy not sweat anything? Doesn't sweat pods, doesn't sweat live shows, doesn't sweat anything. I mean, off camera. Yeah. I mean, just happiest guy ever and not sweating anything. And me, I'm just like a bundle of sweat trying to get to production and everything. And then this story makes sense. If you've been on a hijacked plane that close, you won't sweat anything for the rest of your life. What is going to make you sweat harder than that? So that's, I'm glad you're still here.
Yeah, one other quick thing. So my first year at ESPN covering the national title game, and afterwards I'm at dinner with Chris Fowler, Heather Cox, and John Saunders. May he rest in peace, great guy. And so we're sitting around the table just talking about different things. I didn't bring this up, and I know it wasn't Chris Fowler, so it was either Saunders or Heather Cox. And somehow they said, what's the weirdest thing about you that nobody knows? And I immediately said, I put $20 down on the table and said, I'm winning. So Chris Fowler didn't have anything. He was out. Heather Cox, at that point, lived in Colorado. If people remember the name JonBenet Ramsey, it was a young girl that was kidnapped and never found. Basically, her husband was the last person that saw JonBenet Ramsey alive. And she went through the whole thing. They lived in the same neighborhood, and police actually interviewed her husband because he was considered a suspect. Obviously had nothing to do with it. So that was her deal. John Saunders, who's from Canada, he was like, I was arrested not once, but twice on suspicion of armed robbery. We're like, what? Some reason he got picked up for armed robbery in Canada. So then I followed up with, okay, guys, I was on a hijacked plane. I raked in my money and that was it. So yeah, it's obviously a good icebreaker. And somebody on Twitter posted something a couple of years ago and said, basically, what's something unique about you nobody knows? And I said, well, I was hijacked. And of course the comments was McMurphy for the win, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, I'm not making light of it now because obviously it's different than somebody needs to do a Netflix series if they haven't already. It seemed like there was a hijacked plane every month back then. That was just kind of like the thing to do. And security obviously was a big issue.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And as Brett said, if you enjoyed it, if you're out there listening to the pod or on YouTube, feel free to comment. Matt Mitchell he's basically been gatekeeping a lot of these amazing stories from our staff. So we can clearly turn on the faucet and have more of them come out moving forward. A reminder as well, if you enjoyed the podcast and you're listening and you wanted to get it a little bit earlier, BBOC has its own YouTube channel. It's really important for you guys to subscribe, to comment, get as much interaction as possible. Helps us grow the brand. We're going to be doing that throughout the entire season. So not only all the shows that you've come to know and love from Colin and Stuck and Brett and myself and Mike Iannello, but we're going to have more content with former college athletes. We're going to have special episodes. So you can find that over at YouTube at BBOC. Put in BBOC Sports Betting Channel. You'll be able to subscribe right away. For Brett McMurphy, Colin Wilson, I'm Mike Calabrese. Thank you so much for listening, and we're looking forward to having a great season with you guys. Take care.